So his talk is called Waterspouts and Swampgas, Challenging Popular Assumptions. Please, our first speaker, welcome Brian Dunning.
Hello, hello, hello. Oh, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Now, far be it from me to advise everyone to go charging out of a conference right in the middle of a talk, but that's exactly what I'm going to advise you to do, because this morning, actually at 9:55, right out this window, you're going to see a Falcon 9 rocket take off from Vandenberg Air Force Base. But if you don't want to do that, because that would be incredibly rude, then just go to spacex.com/webcast. So that's in about 55 minutes from now. If you do want to run outside, you'll see it at about 9:58 is when it comes into view from here, and it's right directly that way, unless it might possibly be a little bit that way, depending on what orbit it's going into. It's the first 10 of a new constellation of 70 Iridium satellite phone satellites. 10 of them all on one rocket, which is kind of cool. Okay, let's get to this. What do we have here? Fish. Very good. Any questions? Q&A. We've got plenty of time. So for hundreds of years, people have reported fish falling out of the sky. Sometimes it happens during a rainstorm. Sometimes it happens out of a clear blue sky. And the same thing happens with frogs. And these reports come not just from weird places like India, although that is where most of them come from. They also come from the United States. They come from throughout Europe. Frogs and fish falling out of the sky and landing on people's rooftops and on the streets and on their lawns, and giving everyone quite a surprising experience. Now, if you've ever heard this discussed from a skeptical perspective before, this is the explanation you were almost certainly given. It is a waterspout. The common claim is that waterspouts reach down into the water, grab a neat little school of fish, transport them horizontally hundreds of miles inland, and then drop them in one neat little deposit on a golf course or wherever, whatever it is. Interesting explanation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is another strange phenomena. What we're seeing right here are mysterious lights in the sky. Who knows what they are? Unknown origin. These might be things you see flying around. They might be one of the famous ghost lights that are all around the world, that are particular lights that are in specific places that people keep seeing. And these have also been reported for hundreds of years all around the world. This is an example of some ghost lights. These are the Brown Mountain lights in North Carolina. Someone yell at me if I'm wrong. Places where there's no artificial lights. This is a river in Thailand where once a year they have this enormous festival where you see all these people lined up along the side of the river, and those concrete bleachers that they've put in actually are 3 miles long now. Hundreds of thousands of people will come from all over, not only Asia, but from Europe and the US, to go see this annual festival where the river serpent, called the naga, spits fireballs up into the sky. Very fascinating. And the thing is, if you go there, you will actually see it. If you go there and you go there at the right time of night, you will see these fireballs spitting up out of the river, floating off into the air. Now, this is one of the more common explanations that we've been given for all of these different types of mysterious lights. Obviously, there are many, but this is one: swamp gas. We've all generally heard of the swamp gas explanation. It was first proposed by UFO author J. Allen Hynek, and this is not a great picture of, oh, you can't see it. It's off the top of the screen. That's okay, because like I said, it's not a great picture. So how good of an explanation is that for these few lights that Hynek thought might possibly not be alien spacecraft? It's not a very good one. This is what swamp gas actually looks like. Swamp gas is mostly methane. It's the decomposition of organic matter underground in swamps. Now, it can ignite. It can actually burn in nature, but the conditions are extremely rare. And it can actually spontaneously ignite. It can light itself on fire. But those conditions are so rare and require such precise concentrations of gases that it's never been observed in nature, and it's very difficult to duplicate even in the lab. But when we have done it, swamp gas, it burns very quickly and explosively with a blue-green, and it goes pop. It just goes bang, and it's gone. It never forms a carefully burning, glowing orb that goes floating up slowly into the sky and goes flying around. It's a completely terrible explanation for everything that it's been proposed for. So let's talk about the real causes of those lights in a minute, because this is something else. Let's talk about the real cause of the frogs and fish falling out of the sky. And why is it not waterspouts? Why do we know that it can't be waterspouts? Mainly because waterspouts have no mechanism whatever for either reaching into water or lifting anything up into the sky. That visible column that you see of the waterspout is simply water vapor, because that's where it's very low pressure in the eye of the storm. The wind is going basically horizontally. People have been snorkeling, and waterspouts go right over their back, and they don't even know it. They don't lift snorkelers up out of the water. No elevator mechanism. There's certainly no horizontal transportation system way up in the sky. Basically, there is no way that a waterspout could be responsible for the frogs and fish falling out of the sky. So that prompts us to ask, well, what might actually be going on here? Well, in fact, what's going on here is the fish were already on the ground, and somebody came up and saw them and said, this is a weird place for a fish. It must have come out of the sky. And if you don't like that explanation, there are a lot of fish that do this. What you're looking at right here is a walking catfish. It's native to Southeast Asia, but it's also an invasive species, and it's now found worldwide. There are 6 species of walking catfish just in Florida. And in recent years, we've seen some of these reports coming out of Florida of fish falling from the sky, catfish, of course. And they were almost certainly these walking catfish. There are 18 species of mud skipper, Asia, India, and Africa. They're a little bit weird looking, so if you saw that, you might not think fish, you might think horrible satanic creature and go running screaming. But this is the champion of the fish fall stories. As I said, most of which have come out of India and Southeast Asia. There are 36 species of climbing perch in the world. They're called climbing perch. They walk up on their front fins like little legs, like that. That's how I was dancing last night, too. And the neat thing about them is they look just like regular fish. They don't look unusual at all. And they're also not new to science. They're not unknown. They're unknown to people on the street. They're not unknown to science. People on the street never heard of a climbing perch, but when you see a pile of fish in your lawn, you think, wow, how did that get there unless it fell out of the sky? And that's simply the reason that these stories all got created. That's why we don't have any firsthand accounts, any film of fish actually falling. We don't have any pictures of the fish up on the roof. Those are just things that someone heard and they told their friend, and that person told the reporter and he told another reporter. The stories get distorted and exaggerated in the retellings. So here's the deal with the frogs, and this is probably less surprising to most people, but frogs will migrate in mass like this, and since they're amphibians, they need to keep their skin wet, and so they do these migrations when it's raining. They often go back and forth a couple of times a year between one pool of water and another pool of water, and when it's a rainstorm, especially someplace like Florida where you get really heavy rain, and the rain is bouncing and you see drops bouncing around on the ground, and you see all these little frogs hopping, the illusion is quite surprising. It does look like these frogs are falling out of the sky and bouncing. So there's really no reason to think that frogs have to be raining out of the sky. So what these all are, both of these two stories, the waterspouts and the swamp gas, they're just examples of kind of bad skepticism. The explanations have become so ubiquitous that they've just become assumptions that reporters make when they hear these stories. When they hear about fish in the middle of the golf course, they will say, "Oh, I've heard of that. Waterspouts transport them in." And if you can search the news today, and I guarantee you from somewhere in the world, you will find a story within the last month or so of fish being said to be dropped from a waterspout. So it's a bad assumption. The reporter failed to question his assumptions. And although waterspouts and swamp gas are kind of a fun little side topic for us to talk about here and to snicker at, there are more bad assumptions in life that impact us in more important ways. Many of these cause us to make terrible decisions. So what's going on here? It's a polygraph test. The assumption that many of us make is that polygraph tests can give us useful information about whether a person is lying or not. Now, the fact is that it's not so much the machine, it's a clever polygrapher. He uses techniques to manipulate you into revealing the truth, to make you think that you can't get away with lying. The polygraph machines themselves they actually do work. They do what they say they do, but it doesn't really indicate anything. And they're trivial to defeat. There's lots of different ways to defeat these. Does anyone know one good way to defeat a polygraph machine? Lie? Clench the anal sphincter muscle, yes. And that may be the only time today you hear anal sphincter muscle in one of these talks. Well, the result of this bad assumption that people make, employers make, judges make, innocent people still go to jail. It is not true that these are inadmissible in court. That's another urban legend. Guilty people avoid jail because of polygraph results. And ever since 1993, courtrooms in the United States switched from the federal rules of evidence to something called the Daubert standard. And that put the onus of proof on the judge to disprove that polygraph tests don't work, rather than putting the burden of evidence on the person using it. What have we got here? The Myers-Briggs test, yes. Whoops. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. You can switch slides by scrolling up and down the little finger pad. And if you do it accidentally, you get a whole little show. The assumption that we make with the Myers-Briggs test is this test that gives everyone, we get our 4 little codes. There's these 4 dichotomies, gives us one of each of the 2 letters. So we get our 4-digit code that supposedly tells us everything about our personality. And the assumption that society tends to make is that this gives us useful insight into our aptitudes, kinds of things we might be good at, what kinds of things we might enjoy. Now, the fact of the Myers-Briggs test is that it is uselessly inconsistent. You can go and take the test on 2 different days, 2 different times of day, and probably score a different result. It is statistically completely invalid, because for all 4 of these dichotomies, the general population answers the questions and they form a bell curve. Now, a bell curve does not describe 2 groups, it describes 1 group. So what the Myers-Briggs test does, the analysis of it, is it takes that bell curve, cuts it right down the middle, and says this describes 2 groups of people. Well, that's not true. Most people are right near the border, and they could be either one. So it's not only useless. How do I scroll without flipping the screen? It's not only useless, it's statistically invalid. And just like we see with the polygraph tests, employment decisions are made on these. Child custody decisions are made on these. All kinds of terrible decisions in life are based on this bad assumption. Can you show this slide? What have we got here? Rorschach ink blot test. You're kind of seeing a common theme here. This is another test that's, pardon me? 2 Italian clowns high-fiving. I won't tell you what I see. So the assumption, again, that many of us make, because we've seen this in TV and movies being used all the time, we think that it gives us useful insight into people's personality. Are they a serial killer or not, yes or no? The fact is, of course, that these tests don't really tell us very much. And what people don't know about the ink blot test is the way in which it's administered. It's administered very much like a hot reading that a psychic gives. So one person asks the questions about each one of these ink blots, and they give their answers, and then those answers are written down and given to another person who analyzes them after having read this person's case file. So they know everything about this person, what kind of issues they're going through, and, yes, I see, that makes sense to me. Just even the Wikipedia article on it, it's quite surprising if you check it out. And like we see with those other tests, these other psychometric tests, child custody decisions, employment decisions, prison parole decisions, all kinds of important life decisions based on faulty assumptions. Uh-oh. Where's Dr. Loftus? Do you want to come up and give this part of the talk? No, the McMartin preschool trial. I'm probably going to get some of this wrong, so you can yell at me later. The assumption we all make, because we heard of the McMartin preschool trial, is that repressed memories are a thing. And it's something that has become pretty firmly established in pop culture. And the fact is that there is no good evidence supporting the validity of these supposedly repressed memories and the ability to recover them. In fact, there's very good data showing that these recovered memories are generally completely false. What happened in the 1980s with the McMartin preschool, 7 people's lives were destroyed. This was the most expensive trial in US history. These people were accused of abusing 48 children. 321 criminal charges were filed against them. And they were bizarre. They had an underground cavern in which they performed satanic rituals. It really went pretty far off the rails, what some of the claims against these school employees were. The whole thing started by one parent who kind of made some of these pretty crazy off-the-rail claims and then almost immediately died. And she had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. However, an eager prosecutor partnered with an eager psychologist who wanted to prove his theory of repressed memories. They sort of partnered, and the two of these guys, they kind of created the case. And the version of the McMartin preschool trial that has become part of pop culture is largely the invention of these two guys following something that they thought was true and wanted to be true and wanted to use this case to sort of prove it. One of the defendants spent 5 years in jail, and I believe it's just because he couldn't raise bail, but they were all ultimately exonerated. How did I do? 90%. I'll take it. Thank you. Here's another assumption, and most of us in this room, we're familiar with this. We've heard this, one of these famous skeptical topics before. Everyone assumes that vitamin C will protect you from a cold, and the fact is vitamin C has no effect whatsoever on either the duration or the severity of colds. Vitamin C is a $525 million annual industry in the United States. So that's kind of just a bad decision that a lot of people throw money away on. Okay, wasted resources. How do bad assumptions cause us to waste resources? Now, a couple of these are some of my fun favorites, and this is where we're going to drift a little bit into topics that are more fun than necessarily relevant to our daily lives. Anyone know who we have here? Kind of hard to see in the picture. That is a reconstruction of a Gigantopithecus. Gigantopithecus blacki was the largest of the Gigantopithecus species of basically enormous orangutans. And it's really the only one of the 3 species that was especially enormous, and it was pretty darn enormous. So here's the assumption that some people make based on the existence of Gigantopithecus, which is real. They think that this makes a good zoological precedent for the abominable snowman. So they think it's perfectly valid to spend their life in investor capital taking expeditions to Nepal or wherever and searching for the abominable snowman, getting National Geographic to make a TV documentary about it, for example. Now, how do we know that that's a bad assumption, that Gigano could possibly be a zoological precedent for the abominable snowman? Well, it's because of everything we know about Gigantopithecus. And we know basically 2 things about him. And we know that from the fossils that we have. And we have 2 kinds of fossils. We have a whole lot of teeth, and we have fragmentary jawbones. Not very many jawbones. And most of the teeth that we have were collected from Chinese alternative medicine stores in China, because over the years, the Chinese alternative medicine people had already gone out and collected all of these teeth and put them in their little jars for sale in the stores, where the primatologist said, oh, this is an interesting thing. This is an enormous monster. Where did this come from? And that basically started it off, and they learned everything we learned about Gigantopithecus, which is these 2 things. First of all, we know what he ate. And we know that from the type of teeth that he had and from microscopic scratch marks on the teeth. He ate basically bamboo. Bamboo is the only thing that we know he ate, and he probably ate almost exclusively bamboo because he lived in these bamboo forests of Southeast Asia. If your diet depends on bamboo, how well are you going to do as the abominable snowman up on Mount Everest? Not very well. Gigano would not have survived up in the snowy areas. The other thing we know about him is that he was enormous. And we can tell that just by looking at the jaws and teeth. He was genuinely huge. And no animals that size can walk bipedally. They're simply too heavy. They have to walk on all fours. And how often do you see the abominable snowman depicted as being on all fours? Never. All the stories, they all say, describe him as a wild man or whatever. Jeannie, how did I do? It's better than last time because you corrected me on something. Oh, I got a minute. I'll tell you what she corrected me on. What I had heard, and I don't remember where I learned this, but I learned it from a couple of sources, was that the width of Gigantopithecus' jaw, it was a narrow jaw. I have a narrow jaw because I stand upright. Wait, no. Other way around. My jaw is wide because I stand upright and my windpipe has to go down through the middle of the jaw. But if I was like this, if I was a knuckle walker, which some people say I am, my jaw sticks out like this, and the jaw is then narrower because the windpipe comes out the back. Someone told me that, and I don't remember if it was you who was the first person, but somebody else told me, told me that was wrong. I know I called you and talked to you about it, and you told me it was wrong, and I got it from a couple other people too, so I omitted that. Thank you. Okay, this picture is hard to identify, but this is the infamous Oak Island, which, as we all know, is cursed with pirate treasure, right? Wasted resources is this part of the presentation, and I think we can all agree that certain TV networks are wasting a lot of resources promoting the idea that there is buried treasure on this island. They're not the only ones. A lot of money has been spent on this over 100 years. People have long believed that there's a buried pirate treasure on this island based on this hole that some kids found many, many, many years ago. Therefore, we should all go there and invest in mining equipment and everything and go digging for gold. Wasted resources. The fact is, it was simply a natural sinkhole, and it's not the only one. There are very similar ones found all over the place. And everything that you can read about the Oak Island money pit before the TV show introduced all this new nonsense that's just completely off the rails. Everything you can read about what was found in this hole, like layers of wood held together with coconut fiber, things like that. Those are all features of the natural sinkholes that are found. They're not nicely built layers of wood. If you go digging down, you'll find jumbles of where there's wood and coconut fiber from where storms washed in at one point. And there was years where sand filled in over that. Then another storm came and filled in with more wood. The other thing that was found in these was little bits of gold. There was a few links of gold chain. There was a mysterious tablet. Oh, where's Joe? Is Joe in here? There he is. Joe's one of the world experts on, how am I doing so far? What have I got? 90%. Well, there's an old thing in the, it's really what, 60? So there's an old thing in mining called salting a mine. You salt your mine claim. When you run out of capital and you're convinced that there's some gold down there somewhere, but you just need some more investment cash, you might salt the mine, which means you throw in something valuable to say, oh, look, we got these links of gold chain out of the Oak Island money pit. None of that stuff came out of the pit. The result is not only tens of millions of dollars being wasted, but at least 6 lives have been lost in the money pit over 200 years. This is another example of wasted resources based on faulty assumptions. This is one of many proposed ideas to clean up the garbage out of the Pacific garbage patch. The assumption being that there's enough garbage that this boat with these booms on it can collect it densely enough that it can then use it and burn it for fuel. Now, if you built this, you would run out of fuel very quickly because although there are tiny particles of plastic floating, there is not a solid island of trash. There is not anything near like what you see here in this picture. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this picture illustrates a fairly common amount of garbage floating in the water in front of this boat. It's simply not true. And this is something that I write on fairly regularly. A couple of times a year, I'll check back. And NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they keep on top of this, and they go out there and they're testing the water all the time, and they're looking for how much concentration. And right now, in the densest part of the Pacific Gyre, we've got one particle of plastic every 30 to 90 square meters. It's about the size of a tennis court. One particle, it's these little tiny, looks like a piece of pepper, like you're shaking pepper on the surface of the water. I'm not saying that's good, but it's not this. It's not worthy about spending huge amounts of money to build boats that can't possibly do anything. And nevertheless, especially because it's such a hot topic from a politically correct standpoint and an environmental standpoint, there's a lot of interest in cleaning up the Pacific garbage patch. And virtually all that money is going to be wasted based on faulty assumptions. Ooh, boy. Multi-level marketing. How many of us know someone who is fairly well convinced that they're going to become a millionaire? The assumption is that multi-level marketing companies are a great way to make money owning your own business. Hey. The fact is that despite these sales pitches, and showing you these mathematical pyramids and everything, proving that it's a certainty that you're going to make money, the simple fact, simple math and game theory prove that it's impossible for these things to work. If your business depends on recruiting people to compete with you, you're not going to be successful in business. And we know by simple math, by running 5 to the 14th power, that if in just one of these companies, in all of history, if they ever had a line of distributors just 14 people deep, that alone would require more people than have ever existed. So, no, these don't work and you're not going to make money. And the result, based on this faulty assumption, 99.95% of multi-level marketers lose money. However, my advice is that if you want to spend money on this, instead go to Las Vegas, because only 97.14% of money is lost playing roulette. Go to Vegas, put all your money on roulette, you will do better than you will in a multi-level marketing scheme. This is another one that I love because I always get a lot of arguments on this one. Does anyone recognize this place? It is the Nevada test site where they did all of these underground nuclear tests. All of those craters, those are above an underground cavern that was created by an underground nuclear blast. Excuse me. And what everyone tends to assume is that the downwinders, which is the name we give to people mostly living in the St. George, Utah area, the downwinders, we assume that they're more likely to have cancer and to deserve compensation. Well, the fact is that now, 60 years later after doing this, we have very good data, and there is no correlation at all between elevated cancer and having lived downwind of the nuclear tests, which surprises people, but it is true. The result is that $1.5 billion in payments have been made to people that basically didn't do anything to deserve that. They didn't die horribly of cancer to deserve a payment, so I'm mad at them. Yeah, thank you. There's our branding problem right there. It's me. So that what the government did is they established a fund, and if you had a certain disease in a certain period of time when you lived in a certain area, you were entitled to a fixed payment of a certain amount. That way there was no lawsuits. It's kind of like the vaccine court. Simplified that and greased the whole process. Anyone who follows my work closely knows that I follow this one fairly closely. This is, of course, Amelia Earhart. The assumption is that she made it to an island where she might still be found because we have that shoved down our throat every single day by Nat Geo and Discovery Channel. Therefore, we should throw money and attention at expeditions to try and recover her skeleton. The fact is that no, there's no truth to that at all. We do know where she went down with pretty good certainty. She's in the deep drink, exactly where she was supposed to be. And but the result of this bad assumption that the TV networks make is that they continue making 20 years now of TV programming and these expensive expeditions, lost investor capital, all based on the press releases of one guy who's been promoting his crank theory for 20 years with amazing success. I continue to be blown away by how successful this guy is. His most recent press release was about the skeleton. Did anyone see that? It was maybe 2 months ago. The headline was, "The skeleton might be hers after all." There was a partial skeleton was found on this guy's island Now, hundreds of people had lived on this island for hundreds of years, starting with pearl divers all the way through people in World War II. There was a Coast Guard station there. Britain had a colony on this island. A lot of people and a lot of trash on this island. It's not really surprising that we might find a skeleton there. The skeleton was very obviously that of a man. And yet this guy says, from looking at a couple of pictures of Amelia Earhart, it looked like she had unusually long forearms. Therefore, this skeleton was her. And if you paid attention, that story got promoted on every legitimate news outlet in the world. It was an abominable case of failure to do the slightest due diligence. So now let's talk about physical harm. When does bad assumptions actually cause physical harm to people? And this is our most familiar. This is, when I give this talk at universities, this is the age test. Because everyone knows Steve Jobs on the left. Some people know that guy in the middle, who is, of course, Steve McQueen. And nobody in college has any idea who that guy is on the right, Jim Henson. And, of course, the bad assumption that all three of these guys made was that alternative medicine is a safe and effective alternative to real medical treatment. The fact is they're completely useless. There's no need for me to go into this, into this here. And the result is that people die. They get physical harm based on these bad assumptions. In a broader sense, traditional Chinese medicine is something that is relied upon heavily in China, right? Now that's not right. It's almost entirely a creation for Western New Age audiences. Yes, it did happen. It happened to a limited degree because it was the only way that Mao could provide something that looked like medical care for these remote villages that he couldn't afford to stock with pharmacies and hospitals. So the Barefoot Doctor program was established. And he gave the barefoot doctors, one person from each village was the basic plan, would be brought to a hospital and given a paramedical training, and they were given this manual called the Barefoot Doctor's Manual. This book was 900 pages long. When it was published in the United States in 1970, 600 of those 900 pages were cut out. The 600 pages containing the real medical information, leaving just the 300 pages of, or you can use this herb if there's no medicine available. And that's what persuaded Western audiences that the Chinese rely entirely on alternative medicine. It was a fascinating case. I got a copy of when I did my episode on this, the podcast episode about the barefoot doctors. I got copies of both books, and it's fascinating. It's really blatant. It's really blatant. Well, of course, the result is now people believe, mostly Western people believe, that Chinese traditional medicine is something that they can rely on when they get sick, and they die. There's your physical harm. Someone asked yesterday, what is one of the great successes of skepticism? And this is one that I thought of right away, because a number of people in our community, both in the United States and in the UK, were involved in busting these guys. And this is the ADE 651 bomb detector. If you haven't heard of this, I'll give a quick rundown. This was sold mostly to Iraq by a company in the UK. It's heavy, appears to be a very high-quality device. It's empty. It just has a hinge on the front with this little extendable antenna. It's a dowsing rod. It does nothing at all. There's no mechanism of any kind in it. There's a cord going down, and that goes to a little pouch on the guy's belt. And you put, I think it's like a key card or something. You put into this, and like here's the key card for bombs. I'm going to look for bombs today. Oh, here's the key card for water. I'm going to look for water today. When torn down, it was discovered that these things all contain a microchip, which is just thrown into a hollow space inside the device, and the microchips were anything. They were from a washing machine, from a refrigerator, just collected from junkyards. It's powered by, remind me, who knows how it's powered? No. Supposedly to power the device, what their claim was. It was something like your static energy from your body or something like that. So, physical harm based on bad assumptions. This guy in this company, he got thrown in jail, and his company was put out of business. However, it was too little too late, because there are dozens of copycat companies actively selling these still. This one, Iraq spent $75 million buying these things, and supposedly thinking that their bomb checkpoints are now safe, which they're not, obviously. So the result of this bad assumption is that people are probably getting killed from car bombs. Here is an assumption. Chernobyl proved that nuclear reactors are too dangerous and we should not use them. We know that that's had a pretty huge impact on nuclear industries worldwide. The fact is that from all non-Chernobyl reactor disasters in history, there are still 0 cases of cancer predicted. And the most familiar are Fukushima and 3 Mile Island. But there's been many, many more that we just don't hear about, mostly on things like nuclear submarines and things like this, minor accidents. There's a lot of nuclear accidents. And from all of them put together, we still have 0 cases of future cancer predicted. The result of this bad assumption, and the result of the nuclear industry being crippled in the 1980s, when clean renewables weren't yet ready, is that worldwide we've increased much more, we've increased our usage of coal and increased our dependence on coal-powered reactors. Well, that's Chernobyl on the left, and that's a coal reactor on the right. Oh, can you put the slide back up? There we go. Which one of those two is more deadly? The best estimates for Chernobyl are 4,000 eventual deaths from thyroid cancer. That's a prediction, 4,000. From coal-powered plants in the United States alone, there's a proven death toll of 60,000 per year. People who die of lung cancer that is specifically caused by particulate air pollution, specifically caused by coal-burning power plants. So the move off of nuclear was, I argue, a terrible move, because even if Chernobyl, even if we still use Chernobyl-style reactors, which of course we don't, we would have to have a Chernobyl disaster every 2 weeks to keep up with the ongoing death toll that we have from coal-powered reactors. The episode I'm working on right now of the podcast is on thorium reactors, because there's a lot of excitement about thorium reactors. Oh, thorium, thorium. Actually, the excitement should be about molten salt reactors, because that's really where most of the benefits come from when people talk about thorium reactors. And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating topic. The inherent safety of the machines that are being designed today compared to what the Chernobyl reactor was. Typically, we wouldn't even refer to Chernobyl as a nuclear reactor. It was, design-wise, it's what we call an atomic pile, which is a World War II thing. It was horrible. It should never have been put into operation. There are still a couple of them at a couple locations in the Soviet Union that are still in operation, but they've been heavily, heavily modified. You could never do the same thing that happened at Chernobyl. College students hate that part of the talk. So this is the most important slide. What are the faulty assumptions that you make? I give this talk at companies mostly. I'll go into a business, and whatever their industry is, I open up the floor to questions. What are some faulty industries that your customers make about you? Some faulty industries, faulty assumptions. What are some faulty assumptions your coworkers make about you? You make about your boss. You make about your product. Your customers make about your product, your competition, whatever it is. I'll give this talk at universities, and I'll ask them, what are the faulty assumptions your professor makes about you? They all have an answer for that one. So I'll open it up. Who has an idea? We don't have a roaming mic, do we? We do. Oh, look at that. Does anyone have an example of a faulty assumption, or something you think may be a faulty assumption, or just an assumption that you're heavily dependent on, or your business might depend on?
Testing you. Okay. Yeah, I lived in Arlington Heights, Illinois, in a subdivision behind which high voltage power lines were running. And all the houses along those power lines were much cheaper than the houses just a few streets away. Just because there was a superstition that living near the high voltage power lines were going to increase your chances of, some cancer or something like that. But they really were cheaper. So,
Yeah.
And so if you didn't believe the superstition, you could get a good deal.
Yeah, I wouldn't buy one because they're ugly. However, when I was in high school, we did live in a house that was under some power lines. We had a horse property, and it had, the reason we were able to use it as horse property because it was PG&E, the power company. There's enormous lines going through it. There's these big metal towers that have like 20 big giant lines going across them. And we actually did go out at night with the fluorescent tube, and it lights up all by itself, which is kind of fun for a kid, kind of scary if you think about it. Go another one?
Here's one.
A lot of faulty assumptions that I'm ever wrong. No, and there is some truth to that. I've been a contractor of sorts for the last 30 years, and I will still walk into someone's place, and I tell them, you're not paying for my time, you're paying for my 30 years of experience. I really know what I'm doing. And they're like, I don't know. So I don't know if it's a lack of confidence in my ability or that contractors in general are greatly distrusted. But yeah, quite often, like, well, I don't think you know what you're talking about. I go, what do you do for a living? He goes, well, I'm a dentist. Okay, tell you what, doc, I won't do dentistry if you don't tell me how to do plumbing.
Remember the old story about the guy, the computer consultant that gets called into the boss's office to fix the mainframe computer, looks at it for a second, hits one button, and it's fixed. Gives him an invoice for $1,000. Says, $1,000? You just pushed one button. Give me a breakdown on that, okay? Pushing the button, $1. Knowing which button to push, $999.
Presenting people with facts will get them to change their minds.
That's an assumption, yeah. A very good one. Thank you.
Well, I actually don't know the answer, so maybe somebody here does. I was involved with a parents group who were very adamant about not having a cell phone tower close to the school.
Yeah.
And there was very little, this was maybe 10, 15 years ago. There was very little research either way. So I'm just wondering if that is a faulty assumption that it's going to cause harm to the children
Yes.
or to anybody living
That is a
close
faulty
to
assumption. I have friends in Canada who are always telling me that the fear of Wi-Fi and cell phones seems to be, from what my friends tell me anecdotally, it seems to be much more prevalent in Canada than it is here for some reason. And there are a lot of schools in Canada that won't put on Wi-Fi because the parents protest it. And of course, there's no sound reasoning behind that whatsoever. Do we have another one? Oh, yes, here we go.
One that I've come across is almost everybody believes they're a better than average driver.
Better than average. I did see survey data on that once from the California DMV. I don't recall the size of the survey, but the three questions are: you are a better than average driver, average, or lower than average. And it was something like 80% said that they were better than average. The other 20% all said they were average. And 0 people, not a single response to the survey, said they were below average. Here we are. George, you're an amazingly agile man.
That's me.
Because you are older or are getting older, it is assumed there are some things that you cannot do.
Or in my case, that you definitely cannot do. Right. Well, I did reach that point where my daughter knows things on the computer that I don't know. That was terrifying.
I'm a software developer. I keep hearing about AI because Skynet happened in a movie once.
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Beware of AI, artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
Because of Skynet.
Skynet, yes. The computers are going to take over the world.
Yes.
Do you think that's going to happen?
No.
I don't either. Yeah, but that's something I hear that a lot. That's a fairly common episode request. People want me to do an episode on the idea that computers are going to take over the world and become intelligent, and there's the singularity and all of that stuff. And I've looked into it a little bit to see what the science is behind it, and there's very little science behind it. It's mostly philosophical, so it's kind of, I haven't really done anything with it, kind of out of my wheelhouse a little bit.
So
yes, sir.
this came up a little bit yesterday, but a faulty assumption I encounter a lot is that skeptics are all cynics, that atheists are nihilists, that kind of thing. That's a faulty assumption we encounter.
Yeah, definitely.
Our branding.
Definitely. Fuck you.
We live in a very rural area of Minnesota, and there's this faulty assumption that guns will keep you safe.
Okay. I don't have a gun story to add on to that.
Here's a common one that we're all unbiased. That everybody, all of us think that we're unbiased, and even skeptics, we are biased, and we still need to. Yeah, we still need to check
and that's the
things
whole
out.
core of the issue,
Yeah.
and that's why we don't question our assumptions usually. It doesn't even occur to us to question our assumptions because we assume that everything we think because it's right.
What about the superstition at one time that women were not competent to vote?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Very good.
There's a lot with athletics too. I know I like to jog, and there's this whole stretching and warming up kind of myth that apparently it it actually does more damage the more you sort of warm up and stretch, depending on how you do it, that you are in essence telling your muscles that they're about to get hurt. So yeah, so it's this, we've all seen it. Every athletic team stretches before an event, but in essence, apparently, it's preparing you for injury, so your body sort of shuts down and doesn't do the thing that it should do in terms of keeping you sort of flexible and all that kind of stuff. It's the absolute
And similarly, opposite. You're not supposed, common wisdom anyway, you're not supposed to ice your injuries before you work out because it's going to freeze your tendons and make them brittle and easy to snap.
Sure. Or hydrating too. I know like boxers still don't drink before bouts. Because
I did
it's
not
sort
know
of
that.
Yeah, it's like this
Well, you
cramping.
don't want to have to take a pee break in the middle. Hang on a second here, Swigert.
Yeah. Cramping myth. We got time for just a couple more if anybody has another one. Up in the back here.
I've been an operations engineer in the satellite industry for 27 years, and but because I am a vaginaed American, I still get the assumption that I am when I say I work at satellite industry, they say, "Oh, are you the secretary?"
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What did they say? That the problem with all of Trump's appointments with his secretaries is he still can't get past the idea that there are male secretaries. Yeah, male nurses, yeah.
Over here.
That we know exactly why we're doing what we're doing.
We assume we know why we're doing what
Our
we're
own
doing.
motivations, we assume we know them perfectly.
I can't say that one applies to me all the time, but because I usually don't know what I'm doing.
There's a ton with, there's an entire industry based around selling musical equipment that is just based on absolute falsehoods in terms of the type of wood, quality of wood, tubes, transistors, all kinds of stuff, and it's as a percussionist, it's insane sort of the claims that are made in terms of some gear and the prices versus some versus others. So,
of course, the entire high-end audio industry also is.
I sometimes cling to the idea that I have free will, but I'm unable. But I'm unable to change it because I don't have free will.
Been watching too much Westworld, I think.
There was a writer named Charles Fort who published a magazine called Doubt, and he listed all these things about fish, raining fish, and frogs, and just anything out of the ordinary. And his assumption was we're being controlled by some unknown force. And that explains all the unexplainable things. And people actually believe this.
Can I see a show of hands? How many people have actually looked at one of Charles Fort's books? Very, very few. I would hope so, Joe. Very few. Could you hand the microphone to Joe? Joe, could I ask you a question really quick? What is your impression of whether Fort actually believed anything that he wrote?
You know, Fort was sort of playing a game with people and with science. He loved to taunt, quote, orthodox scientists with things they couldn't explain. And Fort didn't do any investigating. He was not an investigator. He simply had enough money from his wife's inheritance to indulge himself in libraries and find these old news accounts, which he just took on face value. He just assumed if it said it in the paper, it was true, and science couldn't explain it.
Yeah.
I'm not only one of the few people here who's read Fort's books, but I've actually been to Fort's grave, and he's still dead.
That was a bold assumption that you made. He'd still be there.
I think that's where we're going to have to wrap it up. I think our first speaker was a great success. Brian Dunning, ladies and gentlemen, it's here at Forum.
Thank you very much.
Very nice.
You're going to go out this way.